So recently there's been a plethora of fresh speculation and buzz about whether a new installment in the Titanfall franchise might be on the way. For those not aware, Titanfall 2 has become something akin to a bit of a cult classic in the first-person shooter space. It released in October 2016 to rave reviews, with it being given particular credit for what's generally considered to be an amazing single-player campaign, in an era where that was increasingly rare in first-person shooters. It wasn't all about the single player though, the multiplayer was also considered to be some of the best around. You might notice my use of phrases like generally considered and said to be. That's because until recently I had never actually played Titanfall 2. Despite Titanfall 2's critical success, the general sort of narrative that surrounds this game is that it was never really given a fair shake. And never given the chance to become the potential Call of Duty killer that it could have been. That's partly because, as I said, Titanfall 2 launched in October 2016, specifically the 28th of October 2016, which was just 1 week after the launch of Battlefield 1, probably the best Battlefield game in a good while, and 1 week before the launch of Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. Then, despite Titanfall 2's critical success, it was left behind by EA and Respawn would obviously go on to create the megalith that is Apex Legends. This has led to the overall feeling that publisher EA just sent Titanfall 2 out to die, particularly by releasing it alongside another one of its own games in Battlefield 1. As I mentioned before, I myself only played Titanfall 2 for the first time relatively recently, and that was largely because I played both Battlefield 1 and Call of Duty Infinite Warfare at launch, so there probably just wasn't time or money there for me to do that, although I wasn't a working adult at the time, so probably could have afforded it. But yeah, like, I'm not going to play fucking 3 first-person shooters at the same time. So as a result of how good Titanfall 2 was perceived to be, along with the sort of bum steer that it got, there's been a real hunger from a vocal section of fans for a number of years for a return to Titanfall. This hunger was compounded by the fact that in the years since Titanfall 2's launch, EA had basically let the online space for the game become totally derelict and be subsumed by hackers and bots and all that nonsense, so that you couldn't actually really feasibly go back and play Titanfall 2 multiplayer even if you wanted to. So why, after all these years, do fans finally think that a new entry in the Titanfall series is on the way? Well, the reasons for that are helpfully summarised by Alex Berry over at The Escapist as follows, quote, "The internet is abuzz today with the news that Titanfall 2 servers are back online, alongside the first patch to the game in years. This patch directly addresses the server issues that had absolutely shafted the matchmaking, thanks to hackers for the past few years. The patch stabilised the game so that players can start playing online again. As a result, Titanfall 2 has made its way back among the top sellers on Steam, and players are flooding back to the game. It's exciting to see this gem of a game getting new life, seemingly out of nowhere. Meanwhile, inside Titanfall 2 is a mysterious new game mode that is simply labelled question mark, question mark, question mark. The mode has a description reading, 'Your rockets will block out the sun,' which is a reference to the famous line from the movie 300 about their arrows blocking out the sun. Fans have immediately associated the 3 from 300 and this reference to a hint that Titanfall 3 could be in the works. There was also a strange message in the recent Apex Legends patch notes around subject Nessie. The codes included in the patch notes have since been deciphered to refer to the release dates of Titanfall, Titanfall 2 and Apex Legends. More evidence pointing towards a potential Titanfall 3? Question mark. So basically, in short, EA have recently released a patch for Titanfall 2 which fixed some of the online issues that I mentioned previously, and there's this mysterious new game mode that seems to have popped up in it, along with some hints potentially in some Apex Legends patch notes. Well, that's all very well and good, Graham, but why are you making a fucking video about it? Well, as I said, all this new speculation happens to be quite timely because coincidentally, I have just played through and beaten Titanfall 2 for the first time ever. So, with it being so fresh in my mind, I thought this was a good opportunity to talk about what some of my hopes for a potential sequel might be. Let me start by taking some of the things in Titanfall 2 that I think are perhaps not so good, and I'm hoping that Respawn expand or improve on. I know people sort of bum up the story of this game and talk about its amazing single-player campaign. I thought the story was kind of just a bit dull. Like, it's not bad, it just feels kind of like mid as fuck. That's not to say there wasn't elements of the game that I enjoyed. Like, I definitely enjoyed my time with it, just not for any of the sort of narrative things that were going on. Looking back at some of the reviews from the time, part of me can't help but wonder whether there was maybe a little bit of a bias in play. I think even today still, games media have a bit of a bias towards shorter, more approachable games, right? Like, I like a short game at times too. There's not, necessarily anything wrong with that. I'm a person who's now in my 30s who has a job and other responsibilities, so it does feel good to play a short game that doesn't want to take over your entire life. So with Titanfall 2 being sort of 6 to 8 hours, and on top of that, it's been trying to do a meaningful single player first person shooter campaign in an era where that was just becoming increasingly rare. And for example, Call of Duty campaigns were becoming increasingly tacked on. Battlefield wasn't doing traditional story campaigns either. So I can't help but wonder whether this game perhaps got some brownie points by appealing to a certain subset of people. And to be clear, I don't have any issue with the game's length. Like, I think it was fine. I actually played it in no small part because it is shorter, and I was looking for something short in between bigger games as a sort of palate cleanser. And I think if it had been any longer, it would have started to wear out its welcome with me. So I don't have any issue with its length. I just wonder whether it maybe got a bit of an easier ride on some of the things that it doesn't do as well because of that. So again, no issue with its length. It's the actual content of the campaign that I have a real problem with. I just think that the story, the characters, the world, it's all just so fucking dull. There's literally nothing interesting about it. To me, it isn't any better than a half-arsed Call of Duty campaign, and it's certainly not on the level of something like Doom, another game from 2016. So the world of Titanfall revolves around two warring human military factions. They just both seem more or less identical and super generic, and there's nothing interesting about either of them. I don't even really know why they were fighting or what the deal is with either faction beyond just the kind of general sense I got that one military faction were like the big bad sort of Star Wars-esque empire, and the faction that you fight for was like the kind of plucky underdog resistance. But like, I don't know, man, that's just not enough. Like, it's just good guy army guys versus bad guy army guys. And I think a lot of that problem stems from the fact that these factions were originally designed for Titanfall 1, which was a multiplayer only game, and it did have a campaign, quote unquote, but it played out through like multiplayer matches. So the factions had to be things that were pretty similar, so players could play both sides kind of thing, and would want to play both sides. And I think doing a more traditional campaign in Titanfall 2 with those factions, it really suffers for it. You're supposed to be fighting in this sort of grand galactic war, and I just don't fucking know why or care about any of it, really. I would like, firstly, for Respawn to provide a better foundation for who these factions are, why I should care about being on one side or the other, what are the consequences if I don't win the war and complete my mission, what's going to happen? You know, are they going to fucking obliterate the universe, or is it a Star Wars scenario where they're just, you know, evil oppressors kind of thing? What's happening? Why do I care? Or just abandon all that rubbish and start from scratch, create a new villain that is more appealing. And I think playing through Titanfall 2, you can see that Respawn realised that the sort of overarching war perhaps wasn't enough to draw players in, because they actually try to circumvent this somewhat by adding in a bit of a sort of personal revenge type storyline where you're basically sort of hunting down a group of bounty hunters as you go about your missions. Although, now that I'm saying that out loud, you aren't so much as hunting down these bounty hunters as they just happen to be where the objectives of your missions are, I guess. So it's like, you need to do this thing for the overall war effort, but you also have this personal motivation, and it just so happens that both of those things can be solved in one place without you really doing anything about to make that happen, kind of thing. And yeah, now that I'm thinking about this out loud, it does feel a little bit forced, perhaps. But I think the main issue with this revenge story is, because the game is so short, you just don't spend enough time with any of the characters to give a fuck. I think, at like first glance, a lot of the antagonists seem pretty cool, and they, you know, seem like they could have some interesting personalities and all the rest of it. I think they're a bit more sort of out there than a lot of the kind of cookie cutter military type guys you see in Titanfall. And I actually, in hindsight, now think they might be leaning closer to more of what an Apex Legends character might be. But the problem is, you don't ever really spend any meaningful time with any of these characters to actually build up any sort of relationship, good or bad, with them. Most of your interaction with them plays out in sort of dialogue as you're running around shooting and stuff, which I don't know about you, but I find it very hard to pay attention to anything that is said during those types of sequences. So I really hate when games do that. Destiny 2 told a similar story with its Forsaken expansion, and from what I remember at the time, I think that had similar issues in that you don't really get to see enough of the antagonists before you ultimately kill them to actually make it worthwhile. But the key difference with the Destiny story is it was founded upon the death of a beloved character who you had spent years with, years and years at this point with. So that gave you the impetus to push through the story and engaged you in the narrative. Whereas in Titanfall, it's some character that you've seen for 30 seconds and give literally zero shits about. So it just doesn't even have that. So I think what's happened here is Respawn have perhaps tried to hedge their bets a little bit with the story. They've known that the sort of wider war thing's probably not interesting enough, so they've created this personal narrative as well, but it just feels a bit half-baked and it doesn't really fit this short kind of game style, I don't think. So I think they need to kind of pick a lane, basically, focus on the big overarching war, make that conflict between the two sides actually interesting, or fuck the war and focus on telling a more personal story, but focus on that entirely and give it the time that it needs to mature. Now, with all that being said, there is one character that you do spend a lot of time with in the game, and that is your robot sidekick, BT. I think BT is kind of a cool character, but the relationship that you have with him and his story arc is the most cookie cutter, like Iron Giant type shit you will ever see in your life. Right? Like if you had never even heard of Titanfall 2 and I told you, oh yeah, it's a game where you're fighting alongside a big giant robot buddy, you could probably tell me what happens in the game. Like, it has the typical banter where the human makes a joke and the robot doesn't understand sarcasm, so he responds to it literally, and ha ha ha, we all laugh and everything's fantastic. And I was a bit surprised by this because BT was one of the things that I remember people being really high on, and it's nothing that we haven't seen a million times before, so it just was a bit underwhelming to me. This might be a bit of a hot take, but personally I would just go back to the Titans not having personalities and just being tools or machines that humans use.
Glad to have you back in one piece, BT.
Over 25,000, actually.
No.
Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk gameplay. I absolutely love how this game feels when you're controlling your sort of human, when you're on foot doing the traditional first-person shootery stuff. It is amazing. It is genuinely some of the best first-person shooter gameplay I have ever experienced. Combat is fast and fluid, you're running about, sliding, wall running. The time to kill enemies is perfect, such that you're just running through them, mowing them down, not looking back, and you just feel like a fucking god. And that is what kept me going through the game. It is funny though, because as someone who has spent a shit ton of time with Apex Legends over the years, going back to Titanfall 2, I was surprised by just how much it is just exactly Apex Legends. Like, the guns are the same, the movement and the shooting feels the same. It just doesn't have hero abilities, obviously, although there are sections of the campaign that do mess around with that kind of stuff. And the enemies' time to kill is much lower because you're obviously not fighting real hero players like you are in Apex Legends, but it is just straight up Apex, and that's fun. I mean, that's fine. I fucking love Apex Legends, so yeah, that in a single player setting where the enemies are dummies basically is really satisfying. I would say if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and I would love more of the same, please, on that front, Respawn. The final thing that I think needs a bit of work for any sort of potential Titanfall sequel is the Titan combat. Again, this might be another sort of hot take, but I fucking hate the Titan combat in this game. Like, controlling the Titans feels slow and clunky, and I get it, it's a giant fucking robot, but that doesn't make it feel good. All the weapons they've got just felt like ass to me. The enemy Titans are too bullet spongy. I did have fun using the sword, I suppose, but then your Titan feels so squishy and your mobility is so limited that it's hard to actually use it effectively without just getting fucking murked. So I felt like when I was playing a Titan, I was just having to duck behind cover constantly, in contrast to when I'm on foot, where I'm a fucking killing machine running through the level, slaughtering people as I go. So it felt like a real downgrade from that. Like I would rather be on foot, and I would roll my eyes so fucking hard every time I had to get into that stupid fucking Titan. It's really baffling to me that people seem to remember this fondly. Part of me wonders if it's the actual spectacle of like calling down a Titan and seeing it drop down from the sky, and then your guy jumps acrobatically into it, that people actually like more than controlling the Titan. And I agree, that spectacle is great. It's one of the things that completely sets Titanfall apart from its contemporaries, but I just think the combat itself is dog shit, to be honest. So yeah, I would say like speed it up a little bit, try and bring it more up to pace with the rest of the game, make it feel a bit more fluid, give us some weapons that actually feel good, and make the player feel powerful when you're in the Titan, rather than feeling slower and clunkier than when you're on foot. So what do you think? Am I crazy? Do you love the Titan combat for some reason, you absolute sadist? What are your hopes for a Titanfall 3? Let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.